Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles. In fact, today's newspaper is very interesting and we have many important articles to cover. So let's take up these topics for discussion one by one and ensure that it's a comprehensive discussion so that you don't have to go back and read the newspapers again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your comments, do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So before we start, please note that on 31st March, we are conducting an All India Prelims mock test, which gives you an opportunity to practice prelims questions exactly in the UPSC format. So if you're interested, you can register for the mock test by using the link provided in the video description. And also, a new batch for English online classroom program is starting from 30th March. And if you wish to enroll, you can contact the number that is provided over here. So with this, let's get started with the first article from the front page of the Delhi edition. This article is talking about India's attempt to carry out deep sea exploration in the Indian Ocean, where India is looking for precious minerals and resources. So essentially, India is competing with a few other powers, including China, in the Indian Ocean, to explore and eventually extract some of the deep sea minerals and resources that are present in the Indian Ocean. The article says that India has recently applied for an exploration license with the International Seabed Authority. A couple of weeks ago, at the start of this month, it has been reported that India has submitted a formal application to the International Seabed Authority to get an exploration license to explore cobalt reserves, which are present in the deep seabed areas of Central Indian Ocean. And according to reports, India is racing with China to get access to this resource-rich area. Recently, there have been few unconfirmed media reports that Chinese vessels, research vessels, which have frequently entered the Indian Ocean, especially near Sri Lanka, they have been conducting reconnaissance missions. They have been undertaking surveillance missions to explore the resource potential of the Central Indian Ocean basin. This region is extremely valuable as it is known to contain a number of deep sea resources. So this region is located a few thousand kilometers off the coast of Sri Lanka. It's around 3,000 kilometers from the coast of India and a few thousand kilometers from the coast of Sri Lanka. So in this part of the Indian Ocean, precious deep sea bed resources are present, and apparently China has already been exploring the potential to exploit these resources. Even Sri Lanka is laying claim over these resources. So this is what pushes India to accelerate its deep sea mission project, where we are trying to develop the technologies needed to not just explore these areas, but also eventually to mine and harvest these resources. So clearly, these developments, they not just have an economic implication, they also have strategic implications. So hence, we have to understand this topic in complete detail. There are many important topics to discuss under this article. You have to understand what is the International Seabed Authority, what is its role. You should also understand the UN provisions that are present with regard to maritime boundaries, the rights that countries enjoy, and how can countries explore resources in these common areas around the world. We should also understand a few related conventions and other organizations that deal with continental shelf limitation. And finally, we have to talk about India's initiatives to carry out deep seabed exploration. So there are many topics that we are going to discuss. So let's begin with International Seabed Authority. This topic is very important for your prelims as well. What is the International Seabed Authority? The International Seabed Authority is an autonomous international organization which was established in the year 1994 under the UN clause, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. See, maritime boundaries, maritime jurisdictions, They are all regulated under this UN law, which is the UN clause or UN Convention on Law of the Sea. The UN clause was adopted in 1982, and it defines your national boundaries, your national jurisdiction essentially, and defines the rights of countries in different maritime zones. So under the UN clause provisions, this organization was established, this autonomous international organization called the International Seabed Authority. This organization is headquartered in Jamaica. It's headquartered at Kingston in Jamaica in the Caribbean region. There are 169 member countries in this international organization, and India is also a member country. So please note down that India is also a member of International Seabed Authority. Now coming to the big question, what does the authority do? What is its role? What is its mandate? The International Seabed Authority basically regulates any kind of economic activities in the high seas or open oceans. In the open oceans and the high seas, this is where International Seabed Authority plays a very important role. It was established in 1994 as per the agreement relating to the implementation of Part 9 of the UN Clause Convention. This particular agreement deals with exploration and even mining of any economic resources present, both living and non-living resources that are present in the high seas or the open oceans. So what are high seas or open oceans? See, these are parts of our seas and oceans which does not belong to any country. No country can claim sovereignty over high seas and open oceans, as it is treated as part of common heritage of humanity or humankind. It's also referred to as part of global commons. Now, for example, you would have heard about outer space being regarded as part of common heritage of mankind. Even the Antarctic region and the resources present in the Antarctic is treated as part of the global commons. It essentially means no country can claim sovereignty or jurisdiction over these global commons. It is something that belongs to the whole of humanity, right? No country can have territorial jurisdiction or sovereignty claims in these global common areas. So outer space is one such common heritage of humankind, then Antarctic region as well, and the high seas and open oceans, which does not belong to any country. This is where International Seabed Authority comes in. If a country has to explore the high seas and open oceans, if it has to even exploit the living or non-living resources present in the high seas or open oceans, it has to get a license, a permission from this authority. Is that clear? For example, India has won licenses for exploring polymetallic nodules present in the Central Indian Ocean Basin. A few years ago, the same authority had issued a license to India to explore polymetallic nodules, which are reported to be present in large quantities in the Central Indian Ocean Basin. But right now, India has applied for one more license. This license is for exploring cobalt crusts, cobalt-rich crusts, which are present in the same region in the Central Indian Ocean Basin. So that is why India is racing with China, competing with China to access these resources which are part of the global commons. Now let's understand how jurisdiction works in the maritime domain. Let's say, for example, in the case of India, to what extent can we claim our territorial sovereignty? To what extent can we implement our laws, our jurisdiction? Where does India's jurisdiction end, the national jurisdiction of India? Right? This is something we need to understand. To understand this, we have to look at the maritime zones and boundaries created under the UN clause. The UN Convention on Law of the Sea defines these maritime boundaries and zones and defines the rights and jurisdiction of coastal states as well. Please look at this image. It gives you the perfect illustration to understand how these maritime boundaries are drawn according to the UN clause provisions. So here you can see a coastal state. You can see the territorial extent of a coastal state. And according to UN clause provisions, there is a baseline which is an imaginary reference line that is drawn that roughly passes along the coastline of that country. Can you see this dotted line here, which is almost hugging the coastline of this country? This reference line, imaginary reference line that passes along the coastline of that nation, is called a baseline. This is the reference point from where all the distances are measured. Now, according to UN clause, any water body which lies behind the baseline becomes internal waters of that country. That becomes the internal waters of that particular nation. Let's say, for example, there is a gulf present like this. Or let's say there are backwaters, lagoons, estuaries, which are present in the coastal areas. So all these water bodies present behind the baseline, you can see that the baseline is here, and these water bodies are present behind the baseline. So they become internal waters of that country. In internal waters, this country will have full jurisdiction. It's as good as the territory of that nation, the land territory of that nation. So it will have full control, full sovereignty over internal waters. It can impose all the laws and regulations. It will have full authority and sovereignty in the internal waters. And all the resources present here, obviously they belong to that particular coastal state. This coastal state will have full sovereignty and jurisdiction over internal waters, which also means that it can restrict any movement of foreign vessels. If foreign commercial ships are entering the internal waters of a nation, and of course, if military vessels, naval ships of other countries have to enter internal waters, they can't do that without explicit permission from the coastal country. They have to get the permission of this coastal country. So this country can restrict the right to passage. Freedom of navigation in internal waters can be completely restricted by the coastal state because it has full jurisdiction. Is that clear? Then after internal waters, you have territorial waters, also called the territorial sea. This essentially extends to 12 nautical miles from the baseline. You start from the baseline here and measure 12 nautical miles into the sea and draw an imaginary line. So this band that you see here in between the baseline and the 12 nautical mile boundary, this entire band of water becomes territorial waters. As the name itself tells you, this country will have full sovereignty and jurisdiction in territorial waters as well. So up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline, the coastal state will have full rights and full jurisdiction. You can exercise your sovereignty, all your laws will apply, your authorities will have full jurisdiction in your territorial waters. So here as well, right to passage can be restricted. The coastal state can prevent any vessel, be it commercial or military, from entering the coastal waters, the territorial waters of that particular country. And obviously it goes without saying, any resources present here, be it living resources like fisheries or non-living resources like any minerals or hydrocarbons, whatever is present here in territorial waters belongs only to that country. Understood? Then comes your contiguous zone. Contiguous zone extends to 24 nautical miles from the baseline. It's essentially measured from the end of territorial waters, another 12 nautical mile distance is measured, which is roughly 24 nautical miles from the baseline, and this becomes your contiguous zone. In contiguous zone, the coastal state has limited powers. A coastal state will have limited jurisdiction in contiguous zone. Only in certain subjects, jurisdiction and sovereignty can be extended by the coastal state. For example, to deal with marine pollution, oil spills, to deal with any security threats from smuggling, piracy, terrorism, etc. To deal with drug trafficking, arms trafficking, right? So on these matters, the coastal state can exercise jurisdiction in the contiguous zone as well. Even with regard to imposing duties, customs. So in all these matters, even immigration, for example, In all these matters, the coastal state will have jurisdiction in contiguous zone as well. In contiguous zone, your security forces can even pursue terrorists, criminals and pirates. Meaning they have the right to chase them, to chase terrorists, pirates or anyone who's posing a threat to the security of the state. They can be pursued by your Navy and Coast Guard in the contiguous zone. So in these areas, limited powers are extended to the coastal state. Now what if a crime takes place over here? What if, let's say, on a commercial ship, there is a murder which has taken place, right? Can this coastal state exercise jurisdiction in contiguous zone? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the comments. Let's say there is a shooting which has taken place. I'm mentioning this specific example because we have dealt with one such incident. Between India and Italy a few years ago, there was a major diplomatic dispute that erupted over an incident called Enrica Lexi incident. On this particular ship called Enrica Lexi, Italian marine soldiers who were stationed to counter piracy, they mistook Indian fishermen, Kerala fishermen, to be pirates and opened fire, and they killed 2 Indian fishermen. India's argument was that the killing took place in our territorial waters, and accordingly we arrested the Italian soldiers. But Italy countered the claim and said that the killing had taken place in contiguous zone and this is international waters and international law will apply. So this was a huge diplomatic incident between the two countries a few years ago. So do let me know what you think. If, let's say, there is a crime or a murder which has taken place here in contiguous zone, can a coastal state have jurisdiction over that particular case? So this is where your international waters begin. The moment you cross your territorial waters, you are already in international waters. Is that clear? The moment you cross the 12 nautical mile line, you have already entered international waters, which includes contiguous zone. That's why I told you, in contiguous zone, the coastal state has limited powers. It has limited jurisdiction only on specified subjects. On other issues, international law will apply. That is, UN clause provisions will apply. Then finally, we have exclusive economic zone, EEZ. This essentially represents the economic jurisdiction of the country. This extends to around 200 nautical miles from the baseline. From the baseline, you measure a distance of 200 nautical miles, and that essentially would be the exclusive economic zone of that particular country. So whatever resources are present, be it hydrocarbons, fisheries, or minerals, that is non-living resources, all these resources exclusively belong to that country. So foreigners and foreign vessels and foreign states, they can't exploit the resources present in the EEZ of another country. That would be a violation of international law. Is that clear? But however, in international waters, freedom of navigation is guaranteed. That is, the right to passage is a guaranteed right. It's a fundamental right. So be it a military vessel or a commercial ship, right? Even if it's a foreign vessel, they have every right to navigate through your EEZ, even your contiguous zone. They need not ask your permission every time. Is that clear? But if they have to enter territorial waters, then they have to ask permission and prove that they have an innocent passage to carry out. Meaning they will pass innocently without threatening the security of the state. Which means they should not be involved in spying and espionage. They should not be carrying any arms and weapons on board. So in that case, the coastal state can grant permission for foreign vessels to pass through territorial waters. Is that clear? So until territorial waters, a country can even restrict freedom of navigation. But once you enter international waters, freedom of navigation is a guaranteed right. It cannot be disrupted. Understood? Then last point. There's something called extension of your continental shelf. Your continental shelf, right, it extends in a different way for each country. It depends on the geology and the geography of that particular country. Now, if a country can prove that its continental shelf, which is the extension of its land mass, if it's extending beyond its EEZ, beyond 200 nautical miles, right, if it can provide scientific basis and scientific evidence to prove that, then your EEZ can even be extended up to 350 nautical miles. Is that clear? So coastal states get a EEZ of 200 nautical miles, But if you can prove that your continental shelf is extending beyond that, you can claim up to 350 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone. Clear? Now, here you can see the high seas or open oceans. This begins after a country's jurisdiction has ended. Now, let's say you assume this is India in this example, right? And India's EEZ has come to an end somewhere over here. So whatever lies beyond our EEZ, and if there is no other EEZ of another country here, this essentially becomes your open oceans or high seas. It does not belong to any country. No country can have any kind of sovereignty over here, right? Even with regard to exploration, exploitation of resources in the high seas, nobody can claim exclusive jurisdiction, right? So this is where International Seabed Authority operates. You have to get approval, permission from International Seabed Authority, get a license to carry out exploration and mining. I hope these jurisdictions are clear. Now, if you come back to this basic point about International Seabed Authority, around 54% of the world's oceans is made up of high seas and open oceans. This is a very important fact. Around 54%, that is majority of our seas and oceans, it does not belong to anyone. It does not belong to any country. It's part of the global common. It's part of the common heritage of humankind. So there are precious resources present in these high seas or open oceans that account for 54% of our seas and oceans. So that is why many big powers are competing with each other to access the resources present over here. Understood? So now let's look at India's maritime zones. Let's get a fair idea as to what is the extent of India's national jurisdiction. What is the extent of our national jurisdiction in the maritime domain and till where India's exclusive economic zone extends. So this map gives you a perfect illustration. You can see the baseline of India over here, right? You can see the internal waters as well. For example, Gulf of Kutch, Gulf of Kambat, which are present behind the baseline. They become internal waters of India, which means we can restrict access to internal waters, right? It's as good as Indian territory itself. You can see the 12 nautical mile boundary, which is our territorial waters, right? After territorial waters, you're entering international waters. But in the contiguous zone, which is for another 12 nautical miles, we have some limited jurisdiction. But beyond that, it's just your exclusive economic zone, right? So it's around 200 nautical miles measured from the baseline, and you can see India's EEZ stretching out over here. This essentially is our exclusive economic zone. All right? And if you observe, you can notice that our EEZ borders the EEZ of other neighboring countries, including Pakistan over here, Maldives and Sri Lanka. In fact, there is a tri-junction point over here where our EEZ meets with the EEZ of Sri Lanka and Maldives. Then we also share a boundary here with Bangladesh. In fact, there was a dispute as well regarding India and Bangladesh and their EEZ, which was settled by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. This is the dispute settlement body recognized under UN clause. With regard to interpretation of the boundaries, if a dispute comes up, countries can either approach Permanent Court of Arbitration or there is a separate tribunal. There is an International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLOS. So International Tribunal for Law of the Sea, which is established by UN clause, will help settle those disputes through legal proceedings. If you don't want a legal case, if you don't want any kind of conflict, you can approach PCA and adopt the arbitration process to mutually resolve this issue. So India-Bangladesh had approached Permanent Court of Arbitration over their small maritime issue that we had with regard to our EEZ. This ruling went against India. The PCA ruled in favor of Bangladesh, and India had to transfer a part of its EEZ to Bangladesh. All right, so India respected this. We accepted the award of PCA because we abide by international rules. We respect the UN Charter. We have full commitment for UN clause provisions, and as a law-abiding nation, we transferred a small part of our EEZ to Bangladesh. You can see that our EEZ borders the EEZ of even Myanmar, then Thailand, Indonesia, etc. Now, India has two important island territories, Andaman, Nicobar and Lakshadweep. So thanks to these island territories, they get their own maritime boundaries. That is why countries are crazy about having control on islands, faraway islands. Because then the island will have its own baseline. It will have its own territorial waters, contiguous zone and a separate exclusive economic zone. So why do you think our EEZ is bulging over here? India's EEZ is bulging over here because there is Lakshadweep present. And you can see here there is a separate EEZ for India around Andaman Nicobar. So this is the vast extent of India's national jurisdiction in the maritime areas. We are also claiming extended continental shelf, which is shown in the map. We are claiming extended continental shelf here in Bay of Bengal and also here in Arabian Sea. This is an ongoing issue, right? India has submitted the required scientific evidence to show that our continental shelf is extending beyond our EEZ. So if we get all the approvals, right, our continental shelf, if it is shown to extend beyond the EEZ, then we can get extended continental shelf, right, which means our EEZ will also be extended going up to 350 nautical miles in some parts. So here, India has set its eyes on Central Indian Ocean Basin, present somewhere over here, which is part of the high seas. Right? This is the high sea. It does not belong to anyone. This part of Indian Ocean does not belong to Maldives, does not belong to Sri Lanka, does not belong to India. They've all got their exclusive economic zone. So what lies outside of it becomes the high seas. So this is where precious non-living resources have been detected. From polymetallic nodules to polymetallic sulfides to cobalt crusts have been detected in large quantities, and many countries are rushing here to explore and even potentially mine these reserves. Now, coming to extended continental shelf, who will approve the extension of your exclusive economic zone? Which is the authority that deals with it? That is something you should know. This is done by the Commission on the Limits of Continental Shelf, CLCS. This also has been established by UNCLOS. UN Convention on Law of the Sea provides for the establishment of this UN Commission on the limits of continental shelf. So if a country believes that its continental shelf is extending beyond its EEZ of 200 nautical miles, then it has to approach this UN authority, provide all the required scientific and geological evidence to prove that its continental shelf is extending, and then its EEZ might be extended up to 350 nautical miles. So basically, UNCLOS has established three important institutions. One is International Seabed Authority to regulate any kind of deep sea mining in high seas, which is part of global commons. Second is ITLOS, International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, to settle any maritime disputes that arise under UNCLOS provisions. And finally, the third one is the UN Commission on Limits of Continental Shelf, to decide whether a country's continental shelf is extending beyond its EEZ and whether that country should be awarded more exclusive economic zone. Right? So these are the three important institutions created by UNCLOS provisions. Now, coming to the core point of the article. The article is focused on non-living resources present in the high seas and open oceans. This map is depicting the distribution, the global distribution of these precious resources. So we have polymetallic nodules, polymetallic sulfides or vents, cobalt-rich crusts. These are the three major type of resources found in the deep sea bed areas. I will explain briefly what these resources are. We'll come to that part. But first, take a look at the global distribution. You can take a screenshot as well if you want. So please concentrate on the Indian Ocean. Here you can see a blue colored area which has been marked. This is where polymetallic nodules are found in very rich concentration. All right. So this region, which I have marked here, it's nothing but the central Indian Ocean basin. Please write this down. It's very important. This is the central Indian Ocean basin. This is where India had previously got a license from International Seabed Authority to explore polymetallic nodules. Is that clear? Right next to it, in the same region, you can see these yellow shaded regions. This is where cobalt-rich crusts are present in large quantities. Is that clear? So this is where now India has applied for a new license. We have applied for a new license to explore cobalt-rich crusts present here in Central Indian Ocean Basin. All right. So basically, India has kept its eyes on two different types of resources in Central Indian Ocean Basin. One is polymetallic nodules. We have already got a license for exploration of polymetallic nodules. And now we have applied for one more license for exploring cobalt-rich crusts in the Central Indian Ocean Basin. So what are these resources? What purpose does it serve? Let's understand this. Polymetallic nodules that are found here and the cobalt-rich crusts found over here, they have a lot of economic and strategic significance. Polymetallic nodules are very rich in manganese. They're also called manganese nodules. This is how it looks on the deep sea floor, which could be around 4,000, 6,000 meters down, right? You have these small rock or stone-like structures which are found, which are distributed all across the seabed. This would have formed due to natural geological processes, right? Because of the biogeochemical cycles, volcanic activities, right? Everything combined along with the significant water pressure would have led to the formation of these polymetallic nodules which are rich in manganese. As you know, manganese is a precious resource. It has a lot of economic significance because of its industrial applications. So these are your polymetallic nodules. Then you have cobalt-rich crusts. You can see that over here. These are again small rock-like structures found on the deep sea bed, which are rich in cobalt. And there are other associated minerals present as well, right? Including manganese and few other minerals. But these crusts, these small rock-like structures that you find, right, which are spread out on the sea floor, they are rich in cobalt. And what's the importance of cobalt? In today's economy, cobalt has a lot of value because of the need for batteries, primarily to power your electric vehicles and also to store renewable energy. So as the world is focusing on decarbonizing the economies to reduce dependency on fossil fuels, overall, countries are moving towards cleaner forms of energy, renewable forms of energy, from solar to wind. So you need efficient batteries to store that energy, right? Because solar and wind energy is not constant. There are interruptions in the supply. So you have to store the surplus energy which has been generated so that there is constant supply of electricity. Plus, to switch to electric vehicles from the current fossil fuel-based vehicles, you need lithium cobalt batteries. So lithium is one critical resource needed to power your battery technology. Second is cobalt, right? And in Central Indian Ocean Basin, there is a massive deposit of cobalt-rich crusts. This is what China is eyeing right now. China has already taken a leap ahead of India. China has already sent research vessels, carried out surveillance, and India expects China to accelerate its exploration and mining process as well. So now India is catching up. India has also applied for a license to carry out exploration of these areas to look for cobalt-rich crusts. Now, the big question is, does India have the technology to do it? Because deep sea exploration and mining is not an easy task. By the way, please note, till date, no country has ever carried out deep sea mining or exploration. Exploration activities have been done, only research, surveillance activities have been done. But no one has been able to harvest minerals from the deep sea floor and commercialize it because the cost is prohibitive. First of all, high seas are far away from every country. They are located several thousand kilometers away from your coast. And also you need advanced technology, including submersible technologies, to be able to reach the deep sea bed. And imagine mining the resource from there, getting it back to your country and then processing it. That increases the cost of mining and it makes it unviable as of today. That is why, as of today, no country has commercially exploited deep sea resources. Everyone has plans, even US, China, Russia, right, and even other major players, Japan and European countries as well, along with India. They all have plans about exploration. They have started exploration activities, but no one has yet started commercial mining because the technology required is quite advanced, right? Plus the cost is prohibitive. The logistics also is very difficult because of the distance involved, the complications involved in deep sea mining. So many countries are focusing on research and exploration as of now. China, US and others, they are already way ahead of India. They have even developed some deep sea missions. They have sent deep sea submersible vessels underwater, right, below 6,000 meters to conduct these studies, to bring out the scientific data, to see whether in the future we can commercially exploit these resources. But India is also not far behind. We have started a deep ocean mission under India's Ministry of Earth Sciences. The National Institute of Ocean Technology has started working on a deep ocean mission called Samudrayan. Just like ISRO pioneered Chandrayaan and Mangalyaan to outer space, which is also part of Global Commons, the National Institute of Ocean Technology is developing this deep sea submersible vessel called Matsya 6000. It has a diving depth of around 6,000 meters. This will be one of the deepest dives in the world. US and China have reached up to 9,000, 10,000 meters. In fact, popular Hollywood director James Cameron himself has dived to almost 9,000 meters depth in Mariana Trench. So this upcoming mission of India, this deep ocean mission, the plan is to dive to a depth of at least 5,000 to 6,000 meters and conduct deep ocean research. So there will be humans on board. It's a submersible vessel which creates a survivable environment because the pressure would be enormous at that depth. Just like you design a submarine to host people on board, soldiers on board, which can withstand the high water pressure, right? Similarly, this requires even more advanced design and technology to ensure that water pressure will not crush the submersible vessel at these depths. That's why the perfect spherical shape has been used. It's a perfect sphere. In a perfect sphere, I hope you know, the pressure gets equally distributed, right? You can't have even a small dent or a small abnormality. Even that would completely destroy the submersible vessel at that depth. You need a perfect sphere, which is absolutely perfect without any imperfections. And that is what National Institute of Technology has developed. Currently, it is testing the submersible vessel, and very soon, hopefully by next year, India should be able to carry out this deep sea experiment called Samudrayan mission. This is the first step we are taking towards actual research and exploration, right? So I've given some basic details about the deep ocean mission of India. Please go through this later. It tells you what's the objective of the Samudrayan mission and what initiative is funding this project. Just go through these basic facts which could be helpful for your prelims. Now coming to the last point, which is being raised by the article in the newspaper. Now India has raised a bid. We have essentially applied for a permission from International Seabed Authority to explore cobalt-rich crusts present in one particular region called Afnese-Nikitin Seamount. It's also popularly called as AN Seamount. See, even on the sea floor, you will not have a plain terrain, right? The topography is not completely plain. You might have these ridges and sea mounts which are formed due to volcanic and tectonic activity. So these reserves which we are talking about, especially cobalt crusts, they are usually present on the slopes of the sea mounts. Just like you have hills and mountains on land, even underwater, there will be these sea mounts and ridges which are present. Like for example, there is a ridge that connects Chagos in Mauritius with Lakshadweep, the Chagos Lakadiv Ridge, which is a huge underwater mountainous ridge. So right next to it, you have your Central Indian Ocean Basin, where the ANC Mount is located. I'll show you the location as well. Please make a note. This is where ANC Mount is located. You can see how far away it is from India's coast. It's around 3,000 kilometers. Is that clear? It's located in high seas. It's not in Sri Lanka's EEZ, it's not in India's EEZ, it's outside of it. It's part of the common heritage, the global commons. So that is why it is regulated by International Seabed Authority. You need permission from International Seabed Authority to explore and mine the resources present here. So it is part of Central Indian Ocean Basin itself. The same region where we have got a license for exploring polymetallic nodules. In the same region, you have the seamount, the Nikitin seamount or the Afnese Nikitin, ANC mount. This is where cobalt-rich crusts have been detected through initial surveys, and we want to further explore this. That is why India has applied for a license. The reason why India has accelerated the process is because both Sri Lanka and China are competing here. These crusts are rich not just in cobalt, it will also have other associated minerals, from nickel to copper to manganese. All of them are very precious. They are economically very significant, strategically very significant. So Sri Lanka has already raised a counterclaim. Even before India could apply for a license, Sri Lanka has already submitted an application to the UN Commission on Limits of Continental Shelf, asking for its continental shelf to be considered, as it claims that it is extending beyond 200 nautical miles. Sri Lanka's claim is that it has geographical proof, scientific proof, to establish that Sri Lanka's continental shelf has extended beyond its EEZ. So accordingly, it is claiming up to 500 nautical miles of extended exclusive economic zone. This is still an ongoing process. Let's say Sri Lanka has the right evidence, and if it is accepted by the UN Commission on Limits of Continental Shelf, then according to UN clause, Sri Lanka's EEZ might be extended. Usually, maximum extension is up to 350 nautical miles only. But in rare cases, UN clause might consider a further extension as well. If that is done, and if Sri Lanka's demand is met, then Sri Lanka's EEZ might be extended by 500 nautical miles, which will bring ANC Mount under Sri Lanka's jurisdiction. This is what worries India, right? So this is one concern that we have. So this may impede our ambition to explore the cobalt crust in the ANC Mount. So apart from this, there is another concern from China. There have been reports that China has already carried out multiple surveys and surveillance missions in the Central Indian Ocean Basin, and it is also looking to undertake further exploration and mining as well by getting the license from International Seabed Authority. So that is why right now India is in a race with China. Of course, there is a claim from Sri Lanka as well. Apart from that, there is this direct competition between India and China. So these are the important points that we take away from this article, right? So there are many important prelims and mains points that we have discussed. I hope everything is clear. So please be prepared for this topic. Because of the Samudrayan mission and the strategic competition between India and China to explore these resources, you can definitely expect prelims and mains questions. So please note the free class schedule for today, the special class schedule for today. We have 2 NCERT classes lined up from Geography by Mukesh Sir, and Asta ma'am will be taking up Indian Express analysis in the evening, and in the afternoon at 1 p.m. I'll be taking the last session of this special series where we are discussing the role of Prime Ministers in guiding India's foreign policy. Today is the last class where we will talk about the contribution of current Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It's the second part of the discussion, so do join the session live at 1 p.m. The links for all these classes is provided in the video description below. Now let's look at another important article on the front page. According to the article, the International Labour Organization, ILO, has brought out India Employment Report 2024. Please make a note of this. India Employment Report is published by International Labour Organization along with the Institute of Human Development. A very important point for your prelims. Now, the findings of the report could be important for your mains. What are the key findings? It's very factual, nothing much to discuss. I'll just point out the key facts which have been brought out by the report, and then we can move on to the next article. According to India Employment Report, unemployment levels amongst India's youth, educated youth, has doubled over the last few years. Now, this is quite alarming. Even those who are educated, those who have secondary and higher education, they are not able to find jobs in the Indian market. This number has doubled from around 35% in 2000 to around 65% in 2022. That's what the report is claiming. So basically in the last 22 years, from 2000 to 2022, we have educated our youth. They have got basic education at least. They have got secondary and higher education. Problem is they are not finding jobs, right? So unemployment levels have gone up within India's educated youth. So that is one big concern being flagged by the report. Next, please take a look at this. The graph gives us some very important data. Labor participation amongst various sections, it has seen only a marginal improvement. If you look at labor participation from men, the number of men who are working in the labor force, if you compare with the data from 2000, there is actually a drop in 2022. If you compare only with 2019, there is a slight improvement you can see here, but this is largely due to the pandemic. The pandemic had disrupted the global economy. So that is what explains the slight jump that we have seen, because now economic activities have revived in the last 3 years. So you do see a jump in employment levels amongst men and as well as women, amongst the rural workforce and urban workforce. In all 4 categories, labor participation in 2022 has seen a slight jump compared to 2019. But if you compare with data from 2000, it is not a significant increase, or sometimes there is a decrease. If you look at labor participation of men in 2000, it was actually higher and it has dropped over the years. If you look at labor participation of women, it was slightly higher in 2000, it had dropped and now it has seen a slight increase. If you look at labor participation amongst rural and urban workers, even here in the rural areas, labor participation was higher, it had dropped and now it has seen a slight jump. And in the urban areas, it has more or less remained flat. So according to the report, these are few elements which raise concern about the Indian economy. Many economists, they say that we are witnessing jobless growth. India might be growing at a faster rate, right? We might be improving our GDP numbers. But the question is, are we generating enough jobs? Are we creating enough employment? The report also talks about high levels of underemployment, meaning people have found jobs, but it does not match with their skills. People with, let's say, higher education, they are taking up manual routine jobs, which can be done even by a high school graduate. So this gap between the job being performed by well-educated individuals, right? There is a clear gap in their skill and what they're doing. So this creates underemployment. They are being underutilized in the economy. Plus the other big concern is about farm labor shifting to non-farm labor. The report talks about the need to shift out our farmers towards manufacturing, services, etc. This is very essential to build a solid economy. In India, we have almost 55 to 60% of our population still relying on the farm sector for employment. That is unsustainable. If a country has to become developed eventually, you need to push out your farm labor towards non-farm activities. In India, it has been happening. But problem is that those who are taking up non-farm labor, they are largely moving towards construction, real estate, and other manual jobs. Is that clear? They are becoming daily wage earners. They're not finding jobs in factories or industries. They're not getting employed in services sector. Large number of farmers, right, from the farm sector are getting employed in construction industry, in services industry. This again may not be a sustainable path. The problem is that those who are employed in the construction and real estate industry, they are usually on contractual basis. They are daily wage earners. They will not have any social security. They will not have insurance or pensions. So this affects the overall socio-economic well-being of these section of laborers in the Indian market. So that is another concern being flagged. One is about farmers largely moving into construction and other related categories and not finding proper employment in industries or factories. Next, about the contractual nature of employment, where they don't get enough social security. The other concern being expressed by the report is that India's educated youth, they lack the skills for employment. This is even more concerning. See, we've always said India enjoys a demographic dividend right now, which means we have majority of our population in the working age group, and that is a golden period for any country. If you exploit your human resource correctly with the right education and skills and the right opportunities, that will power the country's growth, which is enjoying demographic dividend. But at the same time, this opportunity can become a weakness if you don't impart the right education, right skills, and if you don't create jobs for your youth. In India, education levels have improved. Right? With regard to secondary and higher education, we have done well. We are producing so-called educated youth. Problem is they are not employable. They don't have the skills needed for employment. The study has found that a number of college educated youth, they don't even know how to send an email, how to add an attachment. These are basic tasks. They can't use basic computer tools like, let's say, PowerPoint or Excel. So that is being flagged by the report, and the lack of skills, which makes them unemployable, is a major concern for India. And finally, the report is also talking about the social divide in India's labor market. There is a clear divide on the lines of gender. There is a gender gap between men and women. If you look at female labor force participation rates, it is many times lower than compared to the labor force participation rate of men. So there is a gender-based gap in the labor market, which further puts pressure on women, right? Which further leads to social issues and social problems as well. Plus, the backward sections, the downtrodden sections like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, they are not adequately represented in our labor market. So women, SCs and STs, they are not adequately represented in our labor market, which is also a major concern being flagged by the report. So according to me, these are the 5 to 6 points which are very important. These are the key findings of this report. So if you're aware of this, it's more than sufficient. It is factual, but you can carry out an assessment as well, as we have done. So using this, you can easily write an answer if there is a mains question based on this. And also note, ILO is the one publishing the India Employment Report. Now let's look at another important column from page number 8 that is related to environment and ecology. This column refers to black carbon. Black carbon is a very dangerous pollutant. It's responsible for global warming as well. So this column is mainly focused on black carbon. What is black carbon? How is it produced? What is the risk posed by black carbon? And how is India affected by it? And what is India doing to curb this menace? So let's understand what is black carbon and how is it generated. See, black carbon is basically a soot or the black char material that is produced following incomplete combustion. When you burn any organic substance, be it fossil fuel, biomass, right? When you carry out combustion, if the combustion is not fully complete, if there is partial combustion taking place, it produces a very black deposit, right? A black sooty material is produced, and this is called black carbon. For example, if you burn let's say firewood or cow dung, etc., which is the typical biomass used in rural Indian kitchens, you will notice that in the traditional stove which is present in rural households and even the vessels that they use, it will be completely covered with a black sooty material. Even the walls of the kitchen will be completely covered with this black sooty material, because these materials, they don't undergo full combustion. In an internal environment where there isn't ideal conditions for full combustion to take place, partial combustion would have taken place that releases lot of dangerous pollutants, and these are greenhouse gases as well. It contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. It contributes to global warming, and more importantly, it leads to indoor air pollution. It leads to indoor air pollution. So in Indian kitchens, where these traditional stoves are still used, where biomass is used for cooking purposes, firewood, cow dung and other biomass is traditionally used in rural kitchens to cook food. And because of the patriarchal nature of the society, it's usually women who end up being forced into the kitchen along with their children, which means women and children spend more hours in the kitchen in rural areas, and they end up getting exposed to the toxic gas, the pollutant which is being released. So they inhale this black carbon, which is extremely hazardous for human health. It will not only lead to respiratory disorders, but it also leads to other health conditions, from cardiac risk to fertility problems to eventual death is associated with black carbon. It is single-handedly responsible for several deaths in the country every year. It's responsible for fertility-related problems and respiratory issues and cardiac risk as well. So that is why Prime Minister Modi launched a major initiative, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Under Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, the goal of the government was to shift our women away from these traditional fuel sources. That's why under Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, LPG connections were provided, liquefied petroleum gas. Right? Free LPG connections were provided initially to BPL households or those who are below poverty line. And this initiative has indeed played a very big role in pulling people away from black carbon emitting sources. The biggest source of black carbon emission in Indian household is the kitchen itself, where traditional stoves are burnt using basically these fuels, biomass and other traditional fuels. So the initiative has given a very good result as well. Studies have shown that in several rural households, today LPG-based stoves are being used instead of such traditional fuels, which was contributing to indoor air pollution. But however, there is one concern here. The concern is that in the implementation of the scheme, there are few flaws which have come out. Even though the article is praising the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, right, for its enormous contribution to rural economy and rural health, the concern is that today the distribution of LPG has become a challenge. See, first of all, India doesn't have enough natural gas reserves. We largely rely on imports from other countries. So it's an imported energy resource, which means it is quite expensive, costlier, and the more the government subsidizes, it will put a bigger cost on the government's exchequer. Right? So at one point, it might even become unsustainable, these subsidies. Problem is, LPG prices have shot up as well. The government has linked that with market prices. So the higher prices might become unaffordable for the common man. They might be given a free connection, they might be given subsidized cylinders, but still there is no uptake of cylinders which is happening. Plus distribution across the country has become a challenge. There is a shortage of LPG cylinders as well. So all these problems related to implementation is creating a hurdle. So that is why the article is suggesting another alternative. We can consider another local alternative fuel, which is coal bed methane. Instead of LPG, coal bed methane can be a great alternative according to the writer. Coal bed methane is an unconventional natural gas which can be extracted from your coal seams. from the coal reserves of the country, right? This is a type of natural gas. It's an alternative, unconventional natural gas which can be extracted. And fortunately, India has large reserves of CBM, or coal bed methane. India has the 5th largest proven coal reserves in the world, which means they can contribute significant quantities of CBM, and especially in the Gondwana sediments of eastern India, where most of our coal reserves are present, from Odisha to Jharkhand to West Bengal, right? This belt, there has many places where sufficient CBM can be extracted, which can be a great alternative fuel source for LPG. This can meet the domestic demand. It can reduce our dependency on imported LPG, right? And it does not contribute to black carbon emissions. So that is what we take away from this important column that we just discussed. Now, coming to the last two mains articles, it's more of an update. We have an editorial. Please make a correction. It's not page number 1. It's on the editorial page. It's related to the Gaza war. There's nothing much to discuss here. It's more of an update that I would like to give you. The UN Security Council has adopted a resolution that calls for an immediate ceasefire with regard to the ongoing Gaza conflict. As you know, Israel, which was targeted with a brutal terror attack on 7th October 2023 by Hamas, it had all the global sympathy with it. The global community sympathized with Israel as 1,000+ Israelis were slaughtered by this extremist outfit called Hamas. Without a doubt, it was a terrorist attack. Even India did not hesitate to call the incident as a terrorist incident. But after that, what Israel did has invited a lot of global condemnation. Instead of just targeting Hamas, which was responsible for the terror attack, Israel went for a full-on invasion of Gaza, and it has carried out prolonged military assaults by using disproportionate force. It has carried out airstrikes in civilian areas, used tremendous force in populated areas where Palestinian civilians are present. As a result, 32,000+ Palestinians have been killed. Now, there is no excuse for what Israel has done. No country can look away from this. India itself has already taken a stand. We have openly called out the large-scale civilian killings that Israel is responsible for. The only countries which were still supporting Israel was US and UK. In fact, South Africa and Brazil, they have even called this a genocide, and South Africa even filed a case against Israel at International Court of Justice, calling this as an act of genocide. So around the world, global opinion has turned against Israel because of the atrocities it has committed against Palestinians. It has every right to target Hamas. There's no doubt about it. It has every right to defend itself against terrorism. But it can't target an entire region and kill thousands of civilians in the name of fighting terrorism. There is no excuse for that. That is inexcusable. That is what even Modi government has recently said. Foreign Minister Jaishankar has openly brought this out and said that Israel should have been mindful of the civilian casualties. So at the UN, from many days, a lot of geopolitics was being played between the 5 permanent members regarding a call for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, meaning an immediate halt to the war, considering that this is the holy month of Ramadan. But this resolution, which was supported by Russia and China, because both Russia and China have taken a complete pro-Palestine position. They are strongly opposed to Israel, as they see Israel as an American ally. As they see Israel as an American ally, right? Consistently, Russia and China have always been on the side of Palestinians, historically as well. So they were calling for an immediate ceasefire and pushing for this resolution. But until recently, US and UK were not supportive of the resolution. They wanted a change in the terms that were used in the resolution. US and UK wanted a condition to be placed. Even they were supporting a ceasefire, but based on the condition that Israeli hostages held by Hamas will also be released. As you know, Hamas took hundreds of Israelis as hostages. Many of them have been killed, unfortunately. So US and UK were insisting that any UN resolution should not just call for an immediate ceasefire, but there should be a condition for that. The condition is Hamas should agree to release all the Israeli hostages, and in return, Israel should accept a ceasefire. This was again a fair argument by the US. Just like Palestinian lives matter, even Israeli lives will matter. There's no doubt about it. But however, Israel was against any kind of ceasefire. Israel was not agreeing with this as well. Right? Even with US placing a condition that hostages should be first released and then ceasefire should come in, Israel was still not agreeing for this because Israel wants to continue the war. According to reports, it's planning to launch a major military strike on Rafah border crossing near Egypt, where more than 1 million Palestinians have now been concentrated. It has already blocked all humanitarian aid. There's a tragedy which has been unveiled in Gaza, and now Israel is planning a massive military raid against Rafah crossing point towards the Egyptian border, where more than 1.5 million Palestinians have been cornered. Israel believes number of Hamas terrorists are hiding amongst the civilians. So to prevent this eventual conflict which is coming up, US was trying to push for a resolution as soon as possible, but the American condition was hostages have to be released by Hamas. But since Israel was not showing any kind of change in its approach, in its attitude, now even US and UK have withdrawn their support. So in the latest resolution that was pushed by Russia and China, UK voted for this immediate unilateral ceasefire with no condition on hostages. Russia, China were against it. Russia, China didn't want any kind of condition. They didn't want any inclusion of hostage release. They were just pushing for a ceasefire. So now, US and UK, even they have been frustrated with Israel's actions, and UK voted for this resolution. Meaning, now UK is supporting a ceasefire unilaterally by Israel without any condition for release of hostages. And US abstained from the vote. US was the only country that abstained from the vote. So what does it tell you? It clearly tells you that the Biden administration is also frustrated with Israel, what it has done in Gaza. So US also now believes the time has come to stop this war immediately. So without any conditions, without any promise on the release of hostages, all these countries have directly or indirectly supported the resolution for an immediate ceasefire. In UNSC, you have 15 members. Right? There are 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. So out of the 15 countries, 14 countries have voted for this resolution. 14 UNSC members have voted against Israel. They have called for an immediate ceasefire without any condition on release of hostages. US is the only country which abstained, meaning indirectly it has backed the resolution against Israel. So essentially now global opinion has turned, and the editorial is saying that it's time that Israel listens to the global community. So before it plans any kind of military raid against Rafah, it's better that Israel negotiates with Hamas, call for a ceasefire. Of course, securing Israeli hostages is critical. It is important. As I told you, Israeli lives matter as much as Palestinian lives. But this can be achieved through negotiations with Hamas. Qatar, US and Egypt, they're already mediating talks between Israel and Hamas. The talks are taking place in Doha in Qatar. So through negotiations, Israeli hostage lives can be saved. But the time has come to implement the ceasefire which the UNSC has voted upon. So that is the update with regard to the Gaza war. Next, another important article related to India, Philippines and China. According to the article, India's Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, is on a very important visit to some Southeast Asian countries. He visited Singapore, Malaysia, and now he's going to Philippines as well. So as part of this visit to Philippines, Foreign Minister Jaishankar has made a very big statement. He has said that India stands with Philippines with regard to its sovereignty in South China Sea. Because Philippines has a standing maritime dispute with China in the South China Sea. You can see the South China Sea region here. And you can see a group of islands called Paracel Islands, Spratly Islands, the Natuna Islands over here, right? So this important water body has a lot of strategic and economic significance. It essentially connects Indian Ocean with the Pacific Ocean. It's a vital shipping lane, and it's blessed with enormous resources, from hydrocarbons to fisheries to important minerals. But China is claiming almost the entire South China Sea to itself. Earlier we discussed how maritime jurisdictions are drawn according to UN Convention on Law of the Sea. But China has ignored the EEZ of other countries, and it has drawn this random U-shaped line. You can see a U-shaped line here called the 9-dash line of China. This is based on ancient historical claims of China. Now you can't use historical claims to claim territory in modern times. If that has to be done, then India can claim most of South Asia and other parts of the world as well, right? That it doesn't work like that. But China has been insisting that based on ancient historical claims, most of South China Sea belongs to China. Essentially, it wants its EEZ to be way beyond the 200 nautical mile limit or even the 350 nautical mile limit, which has been laid down by UN clause. So China's claims overlaps with the EEZ of other countries, including Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, then Brunei, and as well as Philippines. So Paracel Island here is disputed between China and Vietnam. And Natuna Island that you see here is disputed between China and Indonesia. So similarly, Spratly Islands, there are many small islets, reefs present here. It's claimed by China, but it actually belongs partly to Philippines, partly to Vietnam, partly to Indonesia and Malaysia, and even to Brunei. So they have legitimate claims over all these small reefs and islets present here. Like Mischief Reef, for example, has been a flashpoint. You also have the second Thomas Shoal over here in the same region, in the Spratly region, that actually belongs to Philippines. You also have Scarborough Shoal. All these are important islets, small islets present here in Spratly Islands that actually belongs to Philippines, and the rest of it belongs to Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia and Vietnam. But China is claiming all of this, and recently it has gotten very aggressive against Philippines. With regard to these claims, China has been using aggression and force to target the vessels of Philippines. China has even disrupted freedom of navigation, which we studied earlier, that it is a fundamental right under UN clause. Freedom of navigation and overflight is a basic right guaranteed through UN clause. But China has disrupted the movement of ships, vessels and even aircraft in the region. And Chinese Navy and Coast Guard, they have even threatened Philippine vessels. For example, they have fired water cannons, they have opened fire and sunk few fishing boats of Philippines as well. There have been few collisions as well between the vessels of China and Philippines. So a lot of aggressive tactics have been used by China, and the Chinese Navy and Coast Guard are increasing their military presence over here. So these increased clashes between China and Philippines has attracted global attention. So that is why India also has taken a stand. This has been consistent with our previous position as well. When a similar issue came up with Vietnam and China over Paracel Islands under the then Manmohan Singh government, even then India had said that China is breaking international rules. These territories belong to the other countries which have a legitimate claim. So now the same has been reiterated by Dr. S. Jaishankar as well, saying that India supports the sovereignty claims of Philippines. This is as per international law. This is as per UN clause provisions. In fact, in 2016, Philippines also had approached Permanent Court of Arbitration. It had filed a case against China. In this ruling, PCA awarded Scarborough Shoal to Philippines. PCA said China has no claims over Scarborough Shoal and it was awarded to Philippines. But did you know what China did? China refused to follow the award. Now compare this with how India had behaved with Bangladesh. We mutually took the case to PCA, and even though ruling went against India and in favor of Bangladesh, we willingly transferred a part of our EEZ to Bangladesh, because we were mindful of our friendly ties with Bangladesh. More importantly, we were committed to international law. But China has broken international rules, threatened the sovereignty of other countries, and that is the big risk it has created here. So India has said we support the sovereignty claims of Philippines, and you should also note India has recently signed an agreement with Philippines to supply the BrahMos cruise missiles. Philippines is procuring the advanced BrahMos cruise missiles, the naval variant, which potentially can be used to target Chinese vessels which are threatening Philippines. So obviously China is angry with India's statements. China also has responded saying that third parties should not interfere in South China Sea issue. But this is basically India giving it back to China. China does the same with our neighborhood. China tries to meddle with, let's say, the Kashmir issue with Pakistan. Right? China has been involved in China-Pakistan economic corridor, which passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which is essentially Indian territory. China meddles in Indian Ocean, threatens India's influence and interests. And now when India gives it back in the same coin, China is retaliating against India, saying third parties should not interfere with the issues of other countries. So this is basically tit for tat. And that's an approach India has been following from some time in order to push back China with regard to its aggression. So that's an important update on India-Philippines relations and with regard to the South China Sea dispute as well. So this completes the detailed discussion with regard to all the prelims articles, with regard to the mains articles. Now let's take a quick look at the prelim section. On page 5, we have an article referring to Kyasanur forest disease, or also called monkey fever. It's abbreviated as KFD. This is an endemic disease in the Western Ghats region, particularly in Karnataka. All right. According to the article, 2 people have lost their lives due to monkey fever, or also called KFD, Kyasanur forest disease. In this year alone, more than 11 people in Karnataka have lost their lives. So it's quite a deadly disease. So you should know what causes KFD. Why is it named as KFD? What is the treatment available? Are there vaccinations available? Right? So the basic details are important for your prelims. So Kyasanur forest disease was discovered in 1956-57. That's when it was discovered in the Western Ghats region of Karnataka. Particularly in the Shimoga region, you have a forest area called Kyasanur. So that is where the disease was discovered. That's why it's named after that place, Kyasanur forest disease, or also called monkey fever. It's a viral disease spread by a virus called KFD virus, Kyasanur forest disease virus. It belongs to the virus family of Flaviviridae. It is primarily spread through tick bites. Ticks are these small bugs found in forested areas, right? Farmers, cattle grazers especially are prone to get bitten by these ticks. The ticks are the carriers. They are the vectors who carry this virus, the Flaviviridae family of KFD virus. So if you are bitten by these vectors, right, you could get infected and symptoms will start developing. Symptoms like high fever, night chills, night sweats, and other deadly symptoms will start developing, and it's a hemorrhagic condition. It causes blood-related conditions and disorders, including bleeding. Abnormal bleeding will start. So it leads to hemorrhagic fever, which can turn fatal as well. So there is no specific treatment as such. Diagnosis is available. It can be easily diagnosed with ELSA test and other lab tests that are readily available. Problem is that there is no specific treatment. Only symptomatic palliative care can be provided, but there is a vaccine available. Even though it's not very effective, there is a vaccine available that can prevent the incurrence of the disease. But however, the disease is still quite spread out in the Western Ghats region of Karnataka. So Karnataka government has been battling this challenge for many years, and you should have basic knowledge about KFD or monkey fever. Next, we have a article on page 7 that refers to the role of State Election Commission. State Election Commission plays a critical role in conducting elections to our local bodies, panchayats and municipal bodies. The article is talking about the lack of timely elections to municipal corporations, and it's calling for reforms to our municipal bodies and the electoral process. So article itself is not very useful for us. It's just the point that it is making. But the fact it's bringing up here, the State Election Commission, can be very important for your prelims. When 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment Act was introduced, it provided for a 3-tier governance model in the country and provided for true decentralization with constitutional status. So local bodies like Panchayati Raj institutions and municipal bodies were created. So to hold timely and periodic elections to these local bodies, a State Election Commission was provided. Under Article 243K, under Part 9 and Part 9A, Part 9A and Part 9B, you have Article 243K and 243ZA, respectively, that deal with elections for panchayats and municipal bodies. So there is a State Election Commission which has the superintendent's control of the conduct of these local body elections for panchayats and municipal bodies. So State Election Commission finds a mention in the Constitution both in Article 243K and 243ZA. Alright, so just remember the basic fact. Next, on page 12, the article is referring to the bullet train project or high-speed rail project that's coming up between Mumbai and Ahmedabad. With regard to the project, it's important to measure the wind speed in coastal areas which might disrupt the high-speed rail traffic. So there is an instrument which is used for measuring wind speed. It's called a anemometer. That's the only point we have to make note of. There could be a basic prelims question. What is anemometer? Essentially, it's a device used to measure wind speed very accurately. So according to the article, the National High Speed Rail Corporation Corridor Limited, which is executing the bullet train project between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, it is installing the wind speed monitoring devices called anemometers all along the coastal belt. Because part of the rail corridor passes closer to the coastline where high-speed wind areas are present between Maharashtra and Gujarat. So that is why a wind speed detecting device called anemometer is being installed. Next, on page 14, we have an article that refers to a very important dam project in Pakistan. It's called the Dasu Dam. There has been a terror attack near the dam site where few Chinese workers have been killed in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. So what is the Dasu Dam? Why is it important? Dasu Dam is a hydropower project. It is Pakistan's largest hydropower project, which is coming up on the Indus River. It's being built across the river Indus, and it's a gravity dam, and it's the largest hydro project of Pakistan coming up in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province that borders Afghanistan. So here, we have studied in previous classes that there is a terrorist group which operates called TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. The TTP has carried out many attacks against Pakistan, and now it has struck again near the site of the dam project. So it's located over here, and China is involved in the construction of this hydropower dam. Chinese companies and Chinese workers are working on the construction of this dam. China has invested funds as well, along with World Bank. World Bank was funding it partly, and China is also an investor. So Chinese companies, Chinese engineers and workers are involved in the project. In the past as well, Chinese workers have been targeted who are working on these dam projects and even on the CPEC project. Usually TTP is the terror outfit targeting the Chinese workers because it wants to bring pressure on Pakistan. TTP mainly targets the Pakistani state. So this latest attack, which has killed several Chinese workers, of course it attracts concern from China, and it also highlights the risk present here in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region. So please know about the dam, where it is located, why it is relevant for India. Is that clear? It's in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and it's the largest dam project, hydroelectric project in Pakistan. Now we take up the next article, which is the last article for today. On the same page, we have an article referring to the Digital Services Act of European Union. See, yesterday we studied Digital Markets Act of European Union, or DMA. We covered what is DMA yesterday and in one of the previous sessions as well. But today let's understand what is DSA, Digital Services Act. Both these laws were introduced in 2022. by European Union to regulate the big tech companies. We understood that under Digital Markets Act, the focus is on regulating competition-related issues. The focus is on preventing monopolies, ensuring that anti-competitive, antitrust policies are implemented to keep the big tech companies under check, to ensure that there is competition, there is scope for innovation and for smaller companies as well to compete with the big tech giants. But what is DSA? What is Digital Services Act? Digital Services Act is meant mainly to counter disinformation, to counter the misuse of online platforms such as marketplaces, social media intermediaries. So be it Instagram, Facebook, all the social media platforms, right? They are your intermediaries. So Digital Services Act recognizes these intermediaries and imposes some restrictions on them. Whereas Digital Markets Act, it designated the gatekeepers of the internet. Few select big companies, the tech companies, were notified as the gatekeepers of the internet under Digital Markets Act. So Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, then Meta, etc., right, Microsoft, they were all recognized as gatekeepers and they were obligated to ensure that they don't breach the competition laws and trust laws of European region. Under Digital Services Act, the focus is on tackling fake news, misinformation, misleading advertisements, and any kind of illegal content which is being circulated on their platforms. The idea is to ensure that social media and internet platforms are safe for the people. We have IT rules in India to do that, through which we regulate social media intermediaries. On similar lines, European Union had enacted Digital Services Act in 2022, through which these intermediaries are regulated. So it guarantees few basic rights for the people, for the users, the customers, and obligates these social media intermediaries and all the marketplaces and the big tech companies to ensure that their platforms do not carry any illegal content, to ensure that fake news, misinformation and disinformation is not spread through their platforms, to ensure that they don't use dark patterns for mis-selling, or they don't push misleading advertisements to mislead the consumer. So all these issues are tackled through the Digital Services Act. So they both work together. They work in a combination, the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act. So these are model laws that European Union has brought out to regulate all the big tech companies. So that is something we can learn from European Union. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's newspaper. Please take a look at the practice questions and write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. So that is it for today. I hope you guys have understood everything. I know it's been a slightly long session, but trust me, it is worth it because it was a lengthy newspaper today and we had many important articles. So let me know what you think in the comments, and if you liked it, do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.